Okay, so we're on Samach Gimel Amud Beis, 63b, and the Mishnah has talked about Kever Tahom. Kever Tahom is a Chiddush, Exeris Akasav, Lachal Moshe Messinai. Some Asmachtas, the Gemara said yesterday, that by Nazir and Korban Pesach, there's a big Chiddush that if somebody became Tameh, now he knows retroactively that he was Tameh. At the time he didn't know, and he went on as if he was Tahor, and he finished his Nazirus, or he bought a Korban Pesach, and then he finds out that he was Tameh. So there's a difference if the tumah was called kever tahom or not. Kever tahom means that it was unknown. Some say that it has to have always been unknown, that no one ever knew about this kever, where somebody died in a way that nobody knew they was buried over there, and that's a chiddush. Now, we see that retroactively somebody went in that place, and now we find that there was a tumah over there, and he was tummy mace at the time that he was a Nazir or Korban Pesach. He was a tummy mace, and it should disturb it retroactively. We should show that the whole time he was tummy. So there's a chiddush of Xeris Akosa by Dafka, these two things, Nazir and also Pesach, that if it already happened with the Eved, so we don't care the fact that he was tummy. And the Nazir goes on as if it was okay, the Korban Pesach was good. The Mishnah said a case in order to present the case. He spoke about somebody, he wanted to tell you there's such a thing called kever tom, which means only that it was an unknown kever. But if it was a known kever, even though you didn't know about it, but it was a known kever, then there's no such thing of kever tom. This cool is all you kever. So instead of case, someone went into a ma'ara, he went into a cave where there was a mikvah over there, and he found later that there was a mace. Because I spent on mace, there was a mace, and he really became tummy.
Now, yesterday, the way we said it was that the mikvah, the whole ma'ara was where the mikvah was.
Right.
Not that there was a mikvah in a ma'ara, because there could be a part where he was standing in the ma'ara and it wasn't where the mikvah was.
Right, so we'll say that he went into the ma'ara where there was a mikvah.
Yeah.
And the Mishnah would simply sound like he was definitely tamei. We see now that he was definitely tamei retroactively because there was a mace over there. But it depends if the mace was a kever tahom or not. What's kever tahom? So it gives an example in the Mishnah. If it was floating, the mace was floating, so it's not a kever tahom. If he was under the water, so then it would be a case where no one ever knew about it, and therefore that would be kever tahom, and that case it will be tahor.
Somebody was saying under the water you can see because it's water.
Kever tahom means that it was unknown. Tahom is another way of saying unknown.
Right in the
depths.
Nimsa mashuka b'karka ma'or, then it's called kever tahom. If he was floating, it's not called kever tahom.
Okay.
The Mishnah Gemara, the rest of the Gemara now today, today's Gemara till Amud Aleph, the Samach Dal and Amud Aleph is going to go on a side point, like Gamri, a side point. We spoke about kever tahom. Again, kever tahom means safek tumas meis, not safek tumas, even a tumas meis, but it was unknown tumas meis that now was revealed. There's a Xeris Akosav, or it's a Lachal Moshe Messinai rather, that b'di'eved, by the Nazir and also Pesach, we disregard the tum. And the Korban Pesach was good, and the Nazirus was good. But in the example that the Mishnah gave for something that's not kever tahom, it said if he was floating, if he was floating, so it was not an unknown tumah. So there you don't have this kula of kever tahom. Very nice. But something sparks a different halacha that the Gemara is going to talk about. There's a Mishnah in Taurus that talks about safek tumah safa al pnei hamayim. A new halacha that if there's a tumah which is floating on the water, and it's only a suffix. There's a suffix if you touch the tumah, if you came in contact with the tumah. So there's a Mishnah in Taurus that says Shisha Sfekus, the Alzelus Sfekus, the Tira Chachamim, that the Chachamim will matar certain Sfekus, and one of them is if it's a suffix tumah safal pnei hamayim. Here's the word suffix tumah safa, but in also pnei hamayim. A suffix tumah which was floating. So there's a Mishnah has nothing to do with kever tahom, nothing to do with that issue. It has to do with a tumah which is floating. A floating tumah for some reason has some kind of leniency, and even though if he definitely touched it, or came in contact with it, whatever kind of contact, so he surely is tameh. But there's a suffix tumah safa al pnei hamayim. If there's a floating tumah, and it's only a suffix if he had contact with it, so it's tahor.
It's a for sure tameh, or it's a suffix that it's tameh?
No, it's a suffix if he had contact with it. There's a piece of sheretz, let's say. Let's take a simple case that surely there's a floating achbar, a floating dead rat, dead mouse. A dead mouse is tummy if he touched it. He's not sure if he touched it. and it goes with the regular Allah Safik Tumah B'Shus Yochid should be Tameh. But if it's floating, if it was on the floor and it's Safik if you touched it, so he's Tameh. But if it's floating and it's Safik if you touched it, so then he's Tahor. Nothing to do with Kevrat Tahom, nothing to do
If
with
it's on the
that.
ground.
If it's on the ground, then he doesn't know if he touched it.
L'chumra, we have to say, he has to assume he's tummy.
Right, that's called Safik Tumah, let's say B'Shus Yochid. Safik Tumah B'Shus Yochid is Tameh. If it's B'Shus Rabim, Safik Tumah is Tor, and B'Shus Yochid, Safik Tumah is Tameh. But if it's floating, for some reason, a suffix floating Tumah is Tor. We'll see in a second, more details. It's a Mishnah in Taurus. Let's read the Mishnah. Mishnah in Taurus, Perek Dalet it is. Perek Dalet, Mishnah. Vav, this is Mishnah Zayin. Zayin starts, Elu Sveikus Shetira Chachamim. The following Sveikus, the Chachamim say is Tor, and one of them is Suffik Ma'am Shuvin. Now, they get it to us then, Suffik Tumah, Saf Al B'nei Amayim. Another four also, another couple. Suffik Mashkin Litome, Suffik Yadayim, Suffik Rishis Harabim, Suffik Devei Sofrim, Suffik, but many, Suffik Shvasim, many Sveikus that are Torah. One of them is called Suffik Tumah Saf Al B'nei Amayim. So the Gemara is just bringing it in because in our Mishnah, besides Kevret Tahom, the Mishnah that gives an example of something which is not Kevret Tahom is a floating mace. And it doesn't have it's not called Kevret Tahom, it was a known tumah, it wasn't the unknown tumah. But l'chorah, what would be the din if it would be a suffix? What would be the case if it would be a suffix? That he's not sure if he touched it or if he had it. So you might ask Kasha, how come our Mishnah says that he's tummy? Our Mishnah says that if it will be a suffix, that doesn't say a suffix in our Mishnah B'Ferish, but the Gemara seems to understand that our Mishnah is even talking about a suffix. Before you said that the whole mikveh was in the Ma'ora and he surely was in the same Ohel. That's how you explained the Mishnah a second ago. The Gemara for some reason,
was because of Ohel.
Yeah, that'll be Ohel, and it'll be a Valei Ohel. But if it's a Kevret Tahom, that was a Mishnah coming to say that if it's Kevret Tahom, so even though it's Valei Tameh, but since it was unknown at the time, so there's a special halacha by Nazir or suppressed that is. But the Gemara sees something in between the lines that is even talking about a suffix Tameh, not only a Valei, not a Valei Ohel, like you said, even if it's a suffix over there. The Mishnah also would say that he would be Tameh if it would not be a Kevret Tahom. If not for the heter of Kevret, the heter of the Ptor of Kevret Tahom, we're not going to say that he's Tor because there's a suffix Tumah Saf Al Pnei Amayim. And then his explanation. If there's such a din as suffix Tumah Saf Al Pnei Amayim is Tor, besides the din of Kevret Tahom. So why don't we say in the case of the nose it should be Tameh? You would have, and you would have said that the Mishnah talking about that is Vadai. That would be a simple thing. That we're not talking about a suffix, it's a Vadai. He's under the same Ohel, he knows for sure that he was Tameh L'Mafreya, but there was a Kevret Tahom. So for Nazir, we're okay with that. But the Gemara somehow sees in between the lines that it's even talking about a suffix. If it's a suffix, so then the question arises, why is he Tameh? It should be not the din of Kevret Tahom. It's not a Kevret Tahom, it's floating, it's not a Kevret Tahom. But it's floating has another heter, Ptor, that suffix Saf Al Pnei Amayim is Torah. So how come Amish says that it's
it
Tameh?
wouldn't matter that it was in a Mara.
Right. I mean, if it's a suffix, it's a suffix. But let's scrolling back to the Mishnah. Here's the Mishnah where it said that Kevret Tahom is Tahor. This is Samach Daled Amad, Samach Gimel Amad Aleph, and it says Ketzad on the fourth line. What's the case of Kevret Tahom? Yorad Litbal B'Mora. The man went to go to the mikvah or to immerse himself in the cave where they had a pool over there, mikvah. Nimsa mace stuff up in Amora, and then they found afterwards that there was a mace that was floating.
And he's already in the water.
Yeah, he definitely became into the Ohel. We would say that. Then Tameh, because it's not Kevret Tahom, because it was a known Tameh, he was floating. Nimsa b'shuka b'karka, if he was sunken in the ground under the water, so then the karka mora, or maybe not under the water, under the karka, then Yorad Lahakeh Torah, the Torah mitumas meis tameh, shecheskas tameh tameh, v'cheskas Torah, sheveklayim l'dova. That if there was a cheskas tahara, that he was not a cheskas tameh, he was cheskas tahara. He went down just to cool himself off. Yorad Lahakeh. Then he's Torah because Kevret Tahom is Torah together with a cheskas tahara. That's what the Mishnah seems to say, and gave an example of being no Kevret Tahom when it was Saf Al Pi Amora. And even though the Mishnah, you could learn very nice, I think in the Mishnah class we'll learn like Dave Yaakov, that it's talking about that Ivadai became Tameh. But the Gemara sees, when I went to the Gemara class, so the Gemara sees someplace that it's even talking about a suffix Tumah, and also he's going to be Tameh. And the question arises that there's a Mishnah in Taurus that says suffix Tumah, Saf Al Pnei Amayim is Tohor. How come the Mishnah says Tameh?
Mhm.
So we scroll down the base. The Gemara is not going to say it openly, but that seems to be what's behind the Gemara. Sofa, 4 lines up. Sofa, Ketzad, you're right. So it says Sofa, Eina Matama Linyan Sheretz. By Sheretz, if there's this could be that the whole din of Tumah Sofa al Panei Mayim is only by Sheretz, maybe. That's where it says it. So if there'd be a suffix Tumah of a Sheretz, that's Sofa al Panei Mayim, there was a floating mouse, dead mouse in the water, and someone went into the water. He doesn't know if he touched it or not, so he's torn.
Uh-huh.
It's mostly a Mishnah. Safa, Eina Matama, Linyan Sheretz. If it'd be floating, it wouldn't be Tameh as far as Sheretz goes. The Tanya, suffix Tumah Safa, if there's a suffix of the Tumah was floating, this is talking about Sheretz over there. Bein B'Kelim, Bein B'Karka Tahora, Reb Shimon Omer B'Kelim Tameh, B'Karka Tahora. It's really a Mishnah, it says here the Tanya. I think maybe, but there's a Mishnah also about this. So the machlokes, if this Tahara applies even if it's in a Kli. If it's in the Karka, there's a built-in swimming pool or mikvah, so or a bar that has water in it. So then everybody agrees that if it'll be a tough suffix, if you touch the sheretz or not, so it's tahor. How about if it's in a kli, like a tub?
What, the sheretz?
The sheretz is in the water. The sheretz is in the water, which is in the tub, in a kli, and the person doesn't know if he touched it or not. Is that called also a suffix tumah tzafa? That mission that it says in Taurus, tumah suffix tumah tzafa pnei mayim is tahor. Is it even the kli or only bekarka? Everybody agrees that it's bekarka. How about a kli? If it will be in a built-in, dug into ground, that there's water inside the ground, and there's a sheretz floating on it, that sheretz, and he doesn't know if he touched it, then he's tahor. That's the Mishnah. How about if it will be bekli? Machlokes in the Mishnah. Bein b'kelim, bein b'karka tahora. Reb Shimon Omer b'kelim tmeya b'karka tahora. Tanna Kama says even if it's b'kelim, Reb Shimon says dafka b'karka. But if it will be b'kelim, it will be tamei.
Why would he say that?
Oh, my time, the Tanna Kama. What's the reasons? So it's going to bring a pasuk for each one. Tanna Kama says it's tahor in both cases, and Reb Shimon says only b'karka, no karka, not b'kli. Amr b'sek b'avdim ksiv b'chol hasheretz hasher reitz. We'll underline, emphasize the psukim over here. One pasuk says b'chol hasheretz hasher reitz. And the other pasuk says al ha'oretz. One pasuk says we're talking about a dead sheretz, and it says that tamar becomes tamei from any sheretz which swarms on the ground, and that's masma kol makom shu shoretz. In any case, any kind of sheretz is going to make tamei. Uksiv al ha'oretz. Another pasuk says dafka al ha'oretz, which is mashma dafka on the ground. But if it wouldn't be on the ground, it'd be floating. So then it wouldn't be tamei. The Gemara is going to talk about a suffix. We're talking about a suffix. Okay, it's at vado vadai mago tamei suffix mago tohor, that the being on the ground is more chomer than being in any other place. It means being suspended, floating, because on the ground it's tamei, even if it's a suffix. But if it's b'chol mokom, if it's not on the ground, it's a floating. So then it's only tamei if he balei touched it. If he had a suffix touching it, it's tahor. That's Tanna Kama's pasuk. That's his source to this halacha about tumah saf al pnei mayim, and therefore he says there's no difference if it's kelim or karka. It's only more chomer if it's al ha'oretz. If it's on the ground, so then it has the chomer that it's tamei even if it's suffix. But if it's not on the ground, it doesn't say a difference where it is. If it's in the karka and the kli, as long as it's not on the ground, so it's on the water which is on the ground or the water which is in the kli. So then it's going to be floating. It's not on the ground, so suffix is going to be tahor. That's the pasuk where the Tanna Kama learned this halacha from, and therefore there's no difference kelim or karka. Rab Shimon timer. So we're going to say the psukim that good. What does it say? Different psukim.
The Tanna Kama was 2 different psukim, right?
Everyone has 2 psukim. There's one pasuk. One pasuk is going to be machma, one pasuk is mekel. Means there's one pasuk that says that it's tamei in any case. One pasuk says only al ha'oretz. So in order to reconcile that, we're going to say that if it's al pnei hamayim, it's only going to be up in the floating. It's only going to be tamei in a vadai. But if it's a suffix, it's not going to be tamei. Al ha'oretz is tamei even if it's a suffix. If it's not al ha'oretz, then it's tahor. And since it doesn't differentiate, so then no difference if it's a kli or it's karka. But Reb Shimon has different pasuk to learn out this halacha, and that's going to be a different enough. It's going to be this halacha about a kli. Reb Shimon my timer amaru ksiv ach mayan. That's one pasuk. Another pasuk is yitma uksiv yitma. So ach mayan is mashma. The first round the pasuk is talking about that a mayan, which means like a spring, mayim chaim, is tahor. The water doesn't become tamei. Water becomes tamei, but if it's mechuber to the ground, like a mayan, so then the water is tahor. It's even a mikvah, it's even the tire also. But the Gemara is mentioning about the person becoming tamei to something, to a sheretz, which is going to be in the water. So one pasuk says Mayan is Tohar. Yitma. Now the pasuk says that even in this case it's still going to be Tameh. Okay, it means like he has a ptur of being floating on the water. Like he learns from the pasuk of Ach Mayan that floating on the water, the sheretz, suffix sheretz floating on the water is going to be Tohar. But the pasuk that says that is talking about a Mayan. Mayan is in the ground. It's not in the kli. Okay, it's not Safa B'Kelim Tameh, the Kakator, that this tour, the Tahara, that the pasuk is hinting to by Mayan is saying Dafka when it's a Mayan, not Dafka Mayim Chaim, but it has to be at least mechubat to the ground, that the water is in the ground, it's in a bore. That's the time that the suffix touched the Masheretz is going to be taught, but if not, it's going to be Tameh. So according to that, it's Dafka if it's in the Karka, but not if it's in the Kelim. What did we learn? We learned Amish a side point, we're going to cruise a little bit to the side. Amish spoke about Kever Tahom. And Agava told us a case where it's not a Kever Tahom if the mace was floating. It's not Tahom. Tahom means that it's unknown. It's not not unknown. But the question is, how about the din of Safal Pnei Amayim? So it triggers a Mishnah in Taras that there is such a Tara of Safal Pnei Amayim. But they're talking about a Sheretz. And the Gemara wants to know, is this Tara of Safal Pnei Amayim of Sheretz, is it Dafka if it's on the Karka, even on the Kli? It brings a machlokas between Tanoim and it brings a pasuk for each one. The question a little bit arises, does this have anything to do with our Mishnah? How come in the Mishnah it's not Torah? The Gemara doesn't make it as a kasha teretz. So it seems to be a machlokas rishonim, just this same machlokas rishonim. In the next Gemara, it's going to come up many girsa changes. In the next Gemara, you just look through the numbers of the Gra. You have here an Aleph, and then a Beis, and a Gimel, and a Dalet, and a Hey, and a Vav, and a Zion. There are a bunch of girsa changes coming up. And it seems that it has to do with the main issue is, does this din of Tumat Safal Pnei Amayim, does it have to do with Sheretz only, which we just spoke about a Sheretz. The Mishnah is talking about a Sheretz over there. Right. Or does it apply to Tumas Mace also? So the Rambam says it only applies to Tumas Sheretz, and therefore it doesn't apply to Amish at all. Amish is talking how once we know what the Gemara is saying, so then we'll go back and say that the pasuk over there is talking about a Sheretz. So we'll go back to the Limudim again. The Limudim are these psukim. Call a Sheretz. There's so much Sheretz. Maybe we're coming out to other Tumas also. The Rambam says that we don't learn out to other Tumas, only Sheretz. And Tosfos and other Rishonim, they learned that it applies to other Tumas also. But in Ohel, let's say by Mace, not in Ohel, only by Maga. And our Mishnah was not a case of Maga, it was a case of Ohel. So therefore there's no Tumah, there's no Ptor of Tumas of Pnei Amayim. Shorter and summary, that the Mishnah that talks about that Tumas of Pnei Amayim is Tameh by our case, not a Kever Tom, and it says it's Tameh. What happened to the thing about Tumas of Pnei Amayim that it says in Masechus Taharos? One shot will say that's Tumas Mace. Only Tumas Sheretz has this Ptor. Amish don't want Tumas Mace. No such thing. The other Rishonim will say that it does apply to Mace also. Right. Only if it's a question if it touched. But if it's a question of Ohel, there's no Ptor of Tumas of Pnei Amayim by Ohel. The next Gemara might depend on the two ways how to learn, and there can be constant gears changes, maybe depending on this machlokes. It surely applies to Sheretz, which is Tamei Maga. Surely there's a Ptor of Tumas of Pnei Amayim. Just remember the case of a floating dead mouse in a pool of water, and he doesn't know if he touched it or not. Someone went into the pool, and he doesn't. Then he sees a dead mouse, and goes into the mikvah. He sees a dead mouse over there. He doesn't know if he had touched the dead mouse. Does that have any applications besides Sheretz? So some say no, only by Sheretz. Some say apply. The Rambam says only by Sheretz, not by other Tumas. The Tosfos will say applies to other Tumas also. Kazais ben Amez, Kazais ben Amez also applies. But the question is going to be, if it's only Maga, but not other kinds of Tumas, only by Maga. Okay, we'll leave it at that as a. To the best of the daf here is going to talk about this, the Allah of Tumas Safal Pnei Amayim. This, which has nothing to do with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah doesn't have Tumas Safal Pnei Amayim. Tanu Rabbanan. Tanu Rabbanan. Kalani Talan. Some of the Gersa, the Gemara means a Gersa that Italan means with a tough, not with the test, with a tough. Italan means which is taken, but Italan with the tough means that it's hanging. Anything which is suspended. A tumah which is suspended. The word Nitalim with a test means anything which is taken, like portable. But with a tough. I'm not sure. Until this time means taking the hands.
And David says it means raising the hands, but
I don't think so either. Until this time has something. The reason it means washing the hands. But that's a different subject. I don't think that the word there, natla, I don't know if the word natila has anything to do with the word nital. I don't think so.
But nital means
But
take.
things. But odds of a gear with a tough. Change the test to a tough. The Gemara points out, just have the Gemara over here, that the word should be here. It says anitolin, the Tosefta gears anitolin. The tough. The Chinu Barambam. That nital means the tola means to be hanging, suspended. So if you have something which is not on the ground, until now we spoke about that, it's not on the ground. It's floating, it's not on the ground. What if something is not on the ground, it's not floating, it's suspended, it's hanging on a string?
So we're going to go with the ground.
I think it's easier. So if it's suspended, that's not called that it's off the ground. It means it's off the ground, but it's the same way you can have something which is on the ground, you got something which is like on the ceiling. The fact that it's being suspended, something's holding it onto it from the air, from the ceiling, so it's also called that it's on someplace. It has a makom. When it's floating, it doesn't have a makom. It doesn't have a place. It's suspended in midair by water. That's also called like air. If you have something that's floating, but something which is being suspended means it's being held onto. It's not held on from the bottom, it's held on from the top. That's also enough to be considered munach. And that doesn't have this kula called safal pnei hamayim. That's one case, nitalin. Also nigrorin, if it's being dragged, even though it's moving, it's being moved, but since it's on the ground, that is munach. And that you don't have this tour of safal pnei hamayim. If you have something which is moving, and while it's moving, you have a suffix if you touched it or not. So you might say, oh, it's in movement. It doesn't have a mokom, it doesn't have a fixed place. No, that's called that it has a fixed place because it's on the ground. So safek kolani tolan, things that are suspended or nigrorin drag, steak and tummy, that is considered on the ground, and the mela suffix doesn't have the ptor of safal pnei hamayim, and that's considered on the ground. But nizrokin, if something's thrown, so then it was suspended in the air. That's kimunochin. It's as if it's on the ground.
If it's being dragged, it's on the ground.
Yeah, it's on the ground.
If
even
it's
though
hanging,
it's hanging, it's on the ground also. It's munach on the ceiling. Call it the ceiling, not the ground. It's considered.
It's
place.
considered place, like on the ground. Okay, so it would be tummy.
But when is a case of like floating? What else is floating? Also thrown. Then is rock. And if it's thrown is in the mid-air or even in the water. Then speak and tahor. Then that's a case of tahor because it's safal pnei hamayim. It doesn't have a mokom. It doesn't have a fixed place. Okay, very nice. With the exception of k'zayis ben hames. So some will learn that means k'zayis ben hames, that there's no din of tumas, there's no tour of suffix safal pnei hamayim by mace, only by sheriffs or amal al pnei tuma.
Mal, there's the tent, right?
Ohel. Oh, so which means ohel is only by k'zayis ben hames. Only a mace has tumas ohel. So some will say that this Gemara mean that these words mean that ohel maga mace might yes have. The question is if it's explaining k'zayis hames when it's going to be ohel. Tosus will learn that k'zayis ben hames, if it's suffix if you touched it or not, also has the ptor of suffix tumas safal pnei hamayim. Only if it's a question of ohel hames doesn't have this ptor of suffix safal pnei hamayim. Question how you learn these
like
words.
Our Mishnah from yesterday.
Right, the Mishnah from yesterday, you could say also k'zayis hames. Say the whole thing of mace doesn't apply. The Rambam will learn the whole thing doesn't apply, even if it's not touching. I don't know how he learns the word mal al pnei tuma, not after any kind of mace doesn't have the ptor of suffix safal pnei hamayim. And also anything which gives tumah off upwards, just like downwards, which the more explains what does that mean? That a zav also they have tumah besides magda, they have tumah also mamala. What does it mean mamala? It doesn't mean ohel. There's no tumah ohel by a zav, but there is a tumah mamala which is called say either hesed if he moved it without touching it, or he carried something that's called al yom shel zav. It also has a certain kind of tumah. So they don't have this ptor of suffix safal pnei hamayim.
What's the bottom and the top?
So bottom would mean that he's on top of it. Bottom means on the Midras also, but that's interesting. That's called, maybe that should also be called Mulmata. That's interesting.
Midras, like if there's 10, he's sitting on it.
Right, even though he's not touching it. That's also.
And also if he's holding up.
Right, that's called Mulmala. That's called that's called Mulmala Kilomata.
Okay.
Which the words are a little difficult. What's it trying to say? Some will say that it only applies to Sheretz, it doesn't apply to other Tumas. Others will say it only applies to Tumas Maga. It doesn't apply to other ways of contracting Tumah. So Ohel not, and Midras not, and Leono Shel Zav not. All the other kinds of contracting the Tumah doesn't apply to this. So it's very basic machlokas. How you learn the Gemara? It doesn't mean to say that it only applies to sheretz. It doesn't apply to other kinds of tumah. Or it only applies to maga. It doesn't apply to other kinds of contracting tumah. The words are a little bit hard either way. That's the end of that Graisa. And now the Gemara has questions. All the questions coming up now till the end of the page. I didn't count how many questions. I'll go along we'll count as we go along. But the questions are going to be when something is considered floating, which the Gilyon Hashas B'Tvega brings down. They had a similar Shabbos. If you have the kli, if you have a walnut inside a kli, a bowl, a dish, and the dish is on the water. Do you see the water? Do you see the nut
sitting on the boat?
Right. If it's on the kli, so it's munach. If it's looking at the nut float as if in the water, then it's not munach. The Gemara has many similar questions. We had such a called sheretz safa pnei hamayim, a suffix tuma pnei hamayim, and inside the words there's going to be a lot of different difficulties if it's talking about mace also, because we just said we're talking about mace only sheretz. If you take the side that it's only sheretz, you have to do some surgery over here because some of them are going to say mace. But the issue is going to be if you have a sheretz which is floating on the water, then we say suffix is Torah. How about if the sheretz is going to be in the kli and the kli is floating on the water, and other such cases? Many questions coming up. Oh, no mistake. Okay. What am I doing here? I'm trying to get question number one. All these things just to get the answer ready. Everything's going to be a question with a teku. Here it goes. All Bar Rabbi question. Meis v'kli u'kli tzaf pnei hamayim. No. If you
so now, we want to change it to sheretz? Right.
So if you hold like the Rambam, it doesn't make sense because there is no tumah tzaf pnei hamayim by mace, only by sheretz. So the Gemara says change the word mace to sheretz if you want to. That's what the Rambam has. So or else the question wouldn't make sense. Taisus could say it's talking about mace because he says that there's a tumas. So the suffix tumah tzaf pnei hamayim applies to mace also. Okay, however you want to do it. Mace b'kli or kli tzaf. Let's say sheretz. Sheretz b'kli or kli tzaf pnei hamayim. Mao. The same case as we have in Masechah Shabbos. You have a sheretz in a kli in a bowl, and the bowl is floating. Do you look at the sheretz as if it's floating or not? Basar kliyas linon or basar. Now the question is misa again. If you have the word mace, then again you're getting involved if it's mace only sheretz. If you have the yes sheretz, if Rambam holds sheretz, he can't talk about a mace. So change his word also. The next word also maybe. Okay, we have to keep on changing it in order. So the Gemara changes it whenever you have to change it. But one first question is the sheretz or the tumah. The tumah is in a kli. The kli is floating. Do you say go basar the kli or do you go basar the tumah? Which side will be which? The Rishonim have machlokas here also. Which side is going to be which? The side would be if you look. I don't know how to say it in the words, but one side will be that since it's in the kli, so it's considered stationary. Or you don't look at it b'yachas to the kli. You look at it b'yachas to the water, and it's floating. Next question. Intim salam basar kliyas linan. Now here, mace lagabi sheretz. Some begins to sheretz lagabi mace. Again, the question is going to be: is Tumas mace have the Torah at all? Here's the next question. Mace al gabe mace al gabe sheretz man. That's question number 2. If you have two tumas on top of each other, is that considered that it has a place? It doesn't have a place. You could. I'm not sure if it's talking about that. They say that there's a kli over here also on top of it, also floating. The whole thing is floating. You might look at it like that. Is that considered that has a place or not?
We changed the word basar.
No, where do you change the which word do you want to change?
Intim salomar.
Basar kliyas linan.
What's the little dog there? Oh, that's somebody else. That's not the.
That's going to be the Rambam.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Mace lagabi sheretz mahu. Some change the gears and sheretz lagabi mace because the whole thing only applies to a sheretz. What's the question? Given the haytumas there, haytumas shiva, command the machta tuma, the kli damya. Dilma, even the Dilma tumas smichtahi. That was the two studying. Do you look at the two? You have two kinds of tumas. One is mace, one is sheretz. Whichever one is on top and the bottom. Let's say sheretz is on top to make it simple. The sheretz is on top of the mace.
Okay.
Do you look at them as one unit or 2 units?
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, they're different because one is tumas sheretz, one is tumas shiva. Means if you touch the sheretz, it's only tummy for that day. You go to the mikveh right away and you Torah at night. If it's a tumas mace, you have to wait 7 days. So they're different. If they're different, command the machta tuma b'kli damya. The question is how to read the words. What does it mean that it's in the kli?
What's the machta?
Machta means that it's munach. It's placed. Then you look at it that it's placed in the kli. I'll just say the two stadim, and then we have to figure out what does that mean. Odilma tumas mechtahi. That both them are tummy. It's different kinds of tumah. One is tumah for 1 day, tumah serve. One is tummy for 7 days, but they're both of them are tumah. So therefore, they're considered one unit. If it's one unit, what do you say?
Maybe you go look from like the mace. I don't know.
No, it doesn't have to do with the mace or the sheretz. It has to do with is it considered floating or not. Our whole issue is it's considered floating. If you know the Gemara is talking about that both of these things are inside the kli. You have a piece of sheretz over a piece of mace in the kli, floating on the water.
Oh, I see.
So there's a floating thing over here. So do you say that on the tzad that you say that it's
If it's on the mace, then it's not floating.
then it's not floating? Why is it not floating?
Because it's munach on the mace.
Well, why? How about munach on the kli? If you had a piece of sheretz on the kli, that was a question, right? Sheretz in the kli,
I
a
thought
dead
there's
mouse in
water
the
in
kli.
the
Not in the kli. On top of the kli. The kli is floating on the water. There's a pool of water with a
Oh,
dish,
on the kli.
and the
the
dead mouse is inside the bowl. We had a question:
Oh.
is that considered floating? Is the mouse considered floating or not? The
Mhm.
mouse is on the kli. It's sitting in the kli. It's in a boat. Or you can say we look at the mouse, but yachas to the water is floating.
Yeah.
Now we're saying even on the side that what? How would you say? Even on the side
That they're together.
that they're together. What does that together mean? That you look at the sheretz
They're
as if it's
one
floating.
unit.
Again, you look at the mouse and the kli all together. The mouse is floating. And still, it's going
We
to be
have
a
a mouse and
question.
a sheretz, right? I thought there were.
A mouse is a sheretz. A mouse is a sheretz.
Oh, a mace.
Oh, a mouse or a mace.
I thought you were saying there was a sheretz and a mace.
It does say that, yes.
Okay. But now what are you talking about? Okay, I got confused.
Okay. The first one was, let's talk about English.
Okay,
I once
English.
was learning with a chavusa from South Africa,
Uh-huh.
and we're talking about if something is a lav or not. It's a lav.
That's
And then
allowed.
if it's a lav or it's worse, so he said it's dead. It's not a lav. Till I thought he was talking about. See, we're talking about a mouse, not a mace. Just talking English, so we'll stay in English.
Okay,
So there's a mouse that's on the water that's considered floating,
yes.
and therefore it's tor. A suffix. Sheretz will be tor.
Mhm.
More the question: if the mouse is in a bowl and the bowl is floating, you look at the mouse as if.
It's the same.
Someone has another question, even a certain way in that first question. But question number two is if you have the mouse on top of a corpse, on top of a bowl, in a bowl, floating on the water. What would that question be? How would you analyze that question?
Because
Even
according to the one that said that
even on the tzad,
it's floating on the water,
that you look at the mouse
it's
in the bowl,
floating on
it's
the
floating on
water.
the water, but if it's
Here
on
it's
top of
twice
something,
removed.
and therefore it's less floating on the water.
It's less floating, we might think, or not.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll leave it open because whatever way you say, I think they have shown that say either this way or that way, however you learn. But yeah, it's far further removed from the book because it's on top of something.
Yeah.
The question is, do you look at them as 1 or 2 units? Look at the sheretz, the mouse and the mace. Look at them as 1, or do you look at it as 2? On one hand,
Uh-huh.
both of them are tummy. On the other hand, different levels of tumah. One is tumah side, one is tumah shiva. Next question. Something out the word v'tamah. This word v'tamah be out. Sheretz al vela tzafa mahu. If you have even a question about a sheretz, if it's considered, how about a sheretz and an avela? Sheretz and an avela might be considered more of 1 unit than a sheretz and a mace. Given the tavai tumas servinun tumas mechtahi, since both of them at the same level of tumah, because both of them are tumas serv.
Yeah, I let's check. What are we questioning?
The question in general, I don't have the details. The question in general is when we look at the sheretz as if it's floating.
I mean, since it's on something that's not so not mamish ground, what do you consider floating?
And it could be that this whole case is talking about that it's on something which is on in a bowl, which is on the water. And do you look at it b'yachas to the water? Do you look at it b'yachas to the thing that's under it? So I don't have clarity of all the different stuff. Maybe Yaakov suggested that the more further removed it is from the thing under it, it's not the yaches to the thing under it, but to the whole general environment. So the third question is sheretz and avela, if it's considered 1 or not. On one hand, both of them are the same. Since both of them have the same level of tumah, as far as only 1 day tumah, so it's considered one thick tumah. Odilma, the word smichta means thick, like the word samich. Odilma, high kazais, high kadasha, that they have two different levels of tumah because the amount that you need for sheretz is adasha. Only a small amount of a lentil bean size of a sheretz is going to give off tumah, but nevela is only have a kazais, which is bigger, an olive size. So they do have a difference. So maybe they're considered two separate units. Next question.
I'm sorry, you said smichta here means thick?
Yeah, the word smichta means thick in this Gemara.
So what were we saying? They
the more
both
they-
have the tumas era.
So that's why it should be considered one thick tumah. It's not two units, it's one unit.
And what is the Einan tuma? And they're not thick.
Inun is them, not Einan. Even the
Inun,
Tabai
they
tumas erev,
they
Inun,
are
since both
thick.
of them are tumas erev, only one day tumah, so therefore tumas mechtahi, it's considered one thick tumah. Or tumah, haikazai svaikadasha, so they consider two units,
Oh,
not
I see,
considered
thick
one.
meaning like one.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Next question, sheretz agabi sheretz, a dead rat over a dead rat. So we say for sure it's the same. Ani vadechat shiurin, and this is surely the same because they're mamish the same kind of tumah. Or no, since it's two units, the mice, it's two different units of sheretz. So maybe they're considered two separate ones. Also a question. The Gemara takes out the next couple of words.
Intensity low.
Right, this he takes out until the end of the next line.
Oh, the whole
Whenever the
thing.
Goran changes the gears,
Sometimes he brings it from the Rishonim or from the Tosefta even, or sometimes the Rambam, like the way the Rambam passed me, so he didn't have that girsa.
he's not saying that it doesn't, it's not shaykh, and he's
Sometimes means they see that it's a mistake.
no, but he's not saying misvar, it's not the gear.
So it's going to be that something's wrong. It doesn't make sense. So it can't be. And then many times they found in the Kisvayad, even if the Gwa didn't have them, they showed that he's right, that it fits that the Gwa. But sometimes it wasn't that. I don't know. They say that maybe the girl went to Golos for a couple of years and he saw many different places. Maybe he looked around for Kisvayad. Could be all kinds of things. But many times he does a misfara, and sometimes we find Kisvayad that are like him. Sometimes we don't find any Kisvayad like him. So it was a swar, he said the should change the gift. The Rishonim also do that. That according to the context, they can't say. Sometimes in this daf also brings down that the Rosh says all the Farshim erased a certain gersa. I'll save shot on the gersa to be miyashav. That the Rishonim come and say that the gersa must be a mistake, and sometimes you can answer the question. So the next question is
Sometimes it's happened without the girl.
without the whether what
Sometimes there's a word that says it just doesn't make sense. It can't be right.
right.
This was an
Yeah.
error of the.
Yeah, sometimes we could do it also. Sometimes we see that as a mistake.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we have a mistake. The next question. How about if you have same question before, but here it shows that the nevela, the meat of the nevela became disintegrated, dissolved, more like a liquid. You consider here there's no kli on the bottom. The Rishonim say that maybe here there's no kli on the bottom. Till now we were speaking about all these cases, 2 units in a bowl on top of the water. Here, maybe there's no water on top. No, nothing but the water. This itself is going to be considered the water. You have a piece of a sheretz, a dasham and a sheretz, that's floating in the disintegrated, in the dissolved, in the liquefied nevela. Since it's now dissolved, it's a liquid state, so it's considered that it's floating, or it's in essence, it's really considered food, even though right now it's in a liquid state, but it's considered a food still. It's considered a solid, it's not considered floating, it's considered muna.
Ukhla here would mean that it's
Food,
dove,
food, right? Ukhla is food. Ukhla.
and so it's like on the ground.
Right. Just like on the ground, on the food, on solid food would be considered on the ground. You don't say it's 2 units. So that's considered, only floating is considered off the ground. Another question, Intim Salom Dochlahu. How about the next case? Sheretz al Gabe Shikvazera. Is that considered floating in liquid?
What happened here?
Yeah, Shikvazera on the floor.
Mhm.
The semen is on the floor, which is a liquid. And the sheretz is on, and the adashim and sheretz is floating in that liquid. So it's going to be considered floating. Or do you say no, that it's considered not liquid? That's I don't understand this for. Since it was uprooted, nekar, it's a Mepharshim say, since it came out of the body, so it's not considered liquid. I don't know what that means. They say themselves, then of course urine is going to be considered liquid. But shechazera is a different kind of system of how it's formulated, and therefore maybe it's not considered a liquid.
I got lost with the ochla though.
Ochla is
What's
the opposite of mashke. There's mashke and ochla. You
Well, are we
say
on the last case or is this a new case?
which one?
If you're gonna say that it's food, so I thought that was the old case.
Right. Yeah, are you letting this
No,
word?
the
Ochla?
intim
No,
solomon.
that always we do that. We always say, and on the side to say that a dissolved nevela is considered food, maybe
Yeah.
shechazera is considered liquid. Even if you say that dissolved,
Oh, even the dissolved, but maybe shit reserve.
there is different.
Okay, I didn't get it.
And the Gemara says further, and maybe you say that shechazera is also considered a solid. The intim salam mechivadim esakrev leiki ochla. That since it doesn't make a difference, ochel doesn't mean ochel. It means that it's not a liquid. The fact that it came out of the body, so it's not considered a liquid for some reason. I don't understand it well. But the next question is sheretz al gabe mechatas. Sheretz. What's another word?
That's the question.
Yeah, that's mahu. They take out these next words also because it says here it's on top of mechatas. It's not on top of the water. That's not the question. Because
be
the question is it considered water?
Mhm.
Is the mechatas considered water?
I see.
And all these questions, lo yadina, we don't know. Teku, let it be. So we don't know the answer of all these questions. In general, I don't have the details of the sugya. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 questions about the halacha that something, a sheresh which is floating, a suffix, if you touch it in the night, is tohar. What's considered floating? And we have many. So in the case there will be a dead sheretz in the water, that's fine. That's sure considered sheretz coming mine. How about if it's in a kli? How about if it's a mace, a sheretz on top of the mace on a kli? How about sheretz in a veil on top of a kli? How about sheretz on top of a kli? How about sheretz on top of nevela sheni mocha? How about sheretz shechvazera? How about sheretz mechatas? Are they considered sheretz amayim? And all these things are taken. And the whole sugi came out agav because our ambition said a case of a mace al saf al pnei amayim, and we didn't regard the Mishnah and Taurus that says safek tumah saf al pnei amayim is tohar, and you have to figure out why. We should say either the Gemara is saying that only sheretz are not mace, or dafka tumas maga and not other kinds of tumas.
Well, I just saw this picture. This is a sheretz al gav a nevela shin minocha. And they have it in the water, but it's left off in the water.
Right, so I don't think so. Is that true? What do they have there?
They have
a sheretz al gabe what? Nevela sheni
it's a
mocha.
novella that's going back.
I
They
think-
have it
I
in the
think
water. I
not.
don't know why.
I would
It
think
just
not.
be on the ground, right?
Right,
So
I would
we're
think
learning.
so. I would think so because the question is that considered liquid or not?
Yeah, okay.
New Gemara. I'm Rav Amnuna. So back to our Mishnah. What did we say? Nazir Bosa Pesach. Get back to home. So we're leaving the city. We went on a cruise. We came back from the cruise. The cruise was about Tumas Saf al Pnei Amayim, nothing to do with us. We're going back to our Mishnah about Kever Tahom. Kever Tahom means that there was an unknown Tumah,
Ever
Tahom, unknown Tumah, and a special chiddush by Nazir and Osa Pesach that if they contracted that Tumah, we don't say that retroactively it wasn't a good Korban Pesach, it wasn't a good Nazirus, and it's Xeris HaKosov. Allah Moshe Messina.
We were calling it Tuma to home, weren't we? Before?
Kever Tahom, Tumah Tahom.
Okay.
What do you have it? Yeah, you have.
I don't
It
remember.
doesn't say Kever Tahom.
Is that what we
Let's-
had originally?
Let's see.
Where did we have that? Just
That should
from
be the
yesterday?
Mishnah on Samach Gimel.
On Samach Gimel,
Tumas Tahom. It says Tumas Tahom. You're right.
Tumas Tahom.
Tumas Tahom.
but here's Keverton. Okay, but it's the same idea.
Maybe Isa said it. It doesn't say those words here.
What? It
Does it
says
say?
Keverton.
It says Keverton. Okay. Amar Rav Amnuna. Where does it say Keverton, by the way?
Right after Amara.
The Keverton. Right. Okay. Nu Allah. Amar Rav Amnuna. So we said that it's only good with the Eved, Lachatchila not. Means if he found out about this tumah before, he did the Korban Pesach before, he did the Teglachas of the Nazirus, so then he's tummy, and the Nazirus is off. It's not over again. The Korban Pesach is not good. But if the Eved, if after the fact, so it's okay. Am Rav Amnuna, big chiddush. Am Rav Amnuna. Nazir ba'osa Pesach sheholchu kevatom Yerushalayim tahorim. A Nazir or also Pesach. These are the two halachas we said about the Keverton, and they went to the Keverton on their seventh day. The Torah. What does it mean on the seventh? Yeah,
What does it mean, Bishvi?
on the seventh day. On their seventh day, Bishvi Shalahan, on their seventh day. What does it mean their seventh day?
The seventh day of the Nazir.
Seventh day of the Tahara. that means that they were tamei,
Tame.
and they have to wait the third and seventh day to become tahor.
And
And
then
they
they're
get
gonna start
sprinkled.
all over again.
They start all over again.
Yeah.
And
So they
usually what
brought their
happens,
Pesach
they get
offering on their seventh day. Oh, and then maybe they have to wait till the eighth day? Is that the question?
no, we want to know if he is tamei or not. If they, we had b'diavad, it's
We have
okay.
three
What
and
would
seven,
what would
right?
be a
We have
case
to-
of b'diavad? If somebody became tamei, and he finds out, and he only finds out afterwards, after he did the Korban Pesach, let's say, let's go, he did the Korban Pesach, or he finished his Nazirus Mamish, and then they tell him, you should know that a couple of days ago, you went in a place where there was a mace, so everything is off. It wasn't a good Korban Pesach, and it wasn't a good Nazirus, but then they say, but if it was a Kibbutz home, then it's okay.
Yeah.
Now we're saying that it didn't happen after the Pesach, and after the Nazirus was over. It happened the Shvi Shalahim, on the seventh day. The seventh day means Erev Pesach is the seventh day, and tonight they can never eat the Korban Pesach.
And that's when somebody told them.
And then they
They found out that day.
that they found out, or they went. There more before spoke about the ego when they found out or when it happened. But on the seventh day, the issue is seventh day means before they went to the mikveh. They didn't go to the mikveh yet. L'chora. They didn't have hair of shemesh. He didn't bring his karbanos, and still it's considered b'diavad already. We said b'diavad means post facto. The Mishnah said that's a shagilach. He did his tiglachas already. Then we say that it's post facto and everything's fine. Here he was tamei, and the question is he going to lose the 7 days? And the Nazir, is he going to lose the 7 days? Because we say you want it in a kever, but we say no, kever tom. But kever tom is only b'diavad. So he says b'diavad means on the 7th day, even though he didn't yet do his whole process of tiglachas tumah, he's supposed to do a whole process in order to start all over again. So it's considered already as if he did it, and therefore we're going to be matir the Nazir, the kever tom by the Nazir also. Even though usually we say only if it, like Mishnah says, Nazir shagilach, a case of Tara, and he did the tiglachas, then he finished. Here, if it's the 7th day, even though he didn't finish the Nazirus, that's also considered the diavad, and we say that kever tom is tall. Again, the words Nazir also pass Hasholchu b'kever tom b'shvish and on their 7th day torim. My timer, the lo alima tumas at home limistar. That tumas at home, this kever tom tumas at home, it's not strong enough. Alima means strong. It's not strong enough to undo the 7-day count, even though he didn't go to the mikveh. He's not tohor. But as far as being sotim and starting all over again, it doesn't start all over again. And since it's on the 7th day, that's enough. He got far enough in order that we should say that tumas at home kicks in and he's tohor. We're matir the tumas at home. That was our Ramnuna saying. Rava has a kasha. Our Mishnah doesn't say like that. Our Mishnah says the case where it depends if he's megaleach. Masiv Rava yodi toher mitumas hameis tamei shecheskas tamei tamei shecheskas toher toher. Our Mishnah had a case where he was going to the mikvah. You see that going. The Mishnah wants to say the difference about toher. How does it go over there? Cheskas tumah cheskas toher. If he was going to become toher from his tumas meis, so then you say tamei. Shecheskas tamei tamei shecheskas toher toher. When does he go down to the mikvah to get tamei from his tumas meis? On the 7th day. He had to already had the 3rd and 7th day of sprinkling. And now he's going the 7 days going to the mikvah. So it's ready the 7th day. When does he go to the mikvah? On the 7th day. So it is the 7th day. And you're saying that there would be a tara. We allow the kever home to ignore the kever home since it's already the 7th day. Here you have a case where it's the 7th day and we don't allow it. I'm saying that's the words. I don't have great shot. I'm not saying that's the translation. Amalei Madina Lacha bin. So here they say Amalei Abaye. The Rush puts in the word. The Rush says the original guess it was Abaye over here in between Amalei. It should be Abaye over here.
As opposed to Rava. Or
The Rab asked the kasha and Abaye. It means that Rav Nur is not answering him. Abaye is answering him.
okay. That's in
We have this word over here. Yeah, I think so. So that should be over here. Abaye said. We have it in the brush over here. Amalei Abaye Madina L'cha ben Nazir Shemachoset Tiglachas. He puts in the word Abaye. Just to see the Rush a second, if we could find it. Masiv Rava, Amalei Abaye. The Rush is going to go, the whole Gemara is discussing between Abaye and Rava. So if you put in the word Abaye over here, so we can read the Gemara. Amalei Abaye, Modina Lacha Benazir Shem Mechusat Tiglachas. Abaye says that Rav Nun is going to agree to you that it is Tamei by a Nazir Shem Mechusat Tiglachas. There's this Nazir who's a Nazir Tamei. So he's Mechusat Tiglachas. Over there, I agree. Before I said Nazir also, Nazir Bosa Pesach. Now we're saying that a Nazir not, because still he does the Tiglachas, it's considered that he's still in the Tumah. If it will be a Tamei base, not a Nazir, so there's no korban to bring. So then, even though it's the 7th day and he didn't go to the mikveh yet, once it's the 7th day, we're going to kick in the Tahara of Tumas HaTahom. But by a Nazir who has to also cut his hair, till he cuts his hair, he's still within his Nazirus and his Nazirus Tameh, and we don't have the Tahara of Tumas HaTahom. So there was a pretty hard in this Gemara coming up. I'll just say what I got from the Rush. So the Rush explains that Rava doesn't like Abaye's explanation of Rabbi Amnuna because that wouldn't be a chiddush. The way he expressed himself was, I also agree to you in the opposite case. What do you want to say? Rabbi Amnuna is not talking about a Nazir, he's not talking about a Osa Pesach. By Osa Pesach, it's pashut that it's considered good enough on the 7th day because he's not missing anything. He's not missing anything. The truth is, of course, he's missing that even after he went to the mikveh, he has to have hair of shemesh. That's what the Gemara is going to talk about now. But Rav is asking that if you're going to explain that Rav Amnuna is not talking about Nazir, he's just talking about Osa Pesach. Osa Pesach, there's no chiddush because he's not missing anything. He is missing something because even if he went to the mikveh, but he's still missing that the sun didn't come down yet. So that is a chiddush. So Rav Amnuna would have meant a chiddush that even though he didn't have hair of shemesh, Amalei Shimsham and Mela Arba, that Arab Shemesh is not considered that it's missing something because it happens by itself. The sun goes down without doing anything. Going to the mikveh, he has to do something. But the sun coming down, it happens automatically. He doesn't have to do anything. That's not considered a chiddush. So Rabbi therefore ends off with a kasha that it's hard to explain that to what Rav Amnuna meant because that's not considered mechusar anything until the 7th day is finished. The Gemara ends off Abaye Hadabe. Abaye also retracted and holds, like Rava says, Shimsham Mela Arva, that the svara, that the sun comes down by itself, and it's not considered mechusar or anything. Abaye agrees to that also. The Tanya Yom Malos Tavi, Tok Malos Lo Tavi. This is talking about a woman that she had a miscarriage. Is that true? A miscarriage. So it talks about a woman after giving birth to a girl is tamei for 80 days. There's 14 and 66 altogether is 80, and then if she has another miscarriage within 80 days, of course it's going to be a miscarriage if it's within 80 days. So the question is, does she have to be a korban for each lady or not? If a woman had many children, she has to be a korban for each one. But if she had a miscarriage within 80 days of the first, so then she doesn't have to bring another korban. She just needs one korban. Yom malos tavi, toch malos lo tavi. If it's after the 80 days, then she has to bring another korban for the second miscarriage. If it's within the 80 days, she doesn't have to. Take out the words v'tipater b'shtein. Tamad loma u'gomlos yimei ta'ara v'yom malos tavi toch malos lo tavi. The words I wouldn't be able to understand, but the Rush explains that it means if she had 2 miscarriages, she had a baby, a girl, and she has 80 days. Within that 80 days, if she has another miscarriage, she would be one korban for both. And if she had another miscarriage after the 80 days, she brings 2. How about if she had a second miscarriage? Well, again, within 80 days. You say that within 80 days of the second miscarriage? There's 1, 2, and 3. 3 things. So the Gemara wants to say that even this case also is considered within Malos, and she doesn't bring a korban for each one separately, 1 korban for all. Amr Rav Kana Shani Yachad Mechasre korban. That since she didn't bring her korban yet, so that's the reason why she's still considered a Tov Malos. Even if it would be within the 80 days, even on the 80th day also, she's still missing hair of Shemesh, even on the 80th day. And it should be considered still toch malos. Amalei Abaye, Shimsha Mamela Arba. The sun comes down by itself. All the Gemara wanted from this is to say that Abaye also agrees to Rava that Shimsha Mamela Arba. You don't look at it as Mechusa because the sun comes down by itself. Adkan, a lot of difficulty. Just I've gotten some rough copy.
Yeah.
That's a everybody. Thank you.